I wish I had is probably the saddest phrase you can ever say in life. And I think most people are collared with that. They're afraid to fail, so they don't do anything. And so I would say, when I wrote the book, I just wanted to know that I tried. I did my best. I didn't want to say, I'm going to write a book. I have to say, I would rather say I wrote a poor book than no book at all. Just try. Just do whatever step you can, because the alternative to do nothing is probably the worst sentence you can put on somebody.
Unlost Cause is a community that shares stories of individuals 40 and beyond who found the courage to reclaim their dreams and live without regrets. I'm David New, and I hope these stories help you find joy, purpose, and passion in a life true to you. Today's guest is someone who redefines what it means to never give up. John David Graham has lived more lives than most of us, from being homeless in his 20s to founding a $2 million nonprofit that gives second chances to people coming out of prison, to becoming a debut novelist at 75, whose book has won over 30 awards. His story is not about one great giant leap, but it's about a series of steady, sometimes painful, sometimes miraculous reinventions. If you ever felt like it was too late, John's story will remind you it's never too late as long as you keep running. John, welcome to Unlost Cause.
I'm very glad to be here today. Thank you, David, very much.
Super excited, so much to cover, but like most things in life, let's start when you were a kid. Can you share with the audience, what was your childhood like?
I think in a nutshell, I think a lot of us think that life is a sprint and we run fast from the beginning. We do well in high school. We go to the best colleges. We get into the best marriages. We have perfect families and perfect jobs. But I have found that there are some of us who not only we can't run the sprint, we can't even find the starting line because of where we come from. We don't know the rules of the game, either poverty or abuse or neglect or just being in a normal family where people are too busy trying to put food on the table to pay attention to your needs. And so you grow up what I call living alone together. And I grew up in Pittsburgh in a working class family. And college was never on the table. The ideal for a successful life was to go work in the mill and spend your days in the mill, your nights in the bar, and you come home and you do that every day for 30 years and then you die. But I wanted to get away. There was something that said there's more than Pittsburgh, but I didn't know what. So I traveled 300 miles away to a Methodist school in Kentucky, and I studied psychology, thinking that would help me. But the trouble is, you can learn something and not have any idea how to apply it, because you don't know the rules. You don't know even who knows the rules. So I went from job to job with a degree, but no direction. I was a children's home counselor, I was a truck driver, I was a fireman, which is generally considered a good job, but I just was looking for something else. Ended up as a building contractor, traveling from state to state with my family, trying to find where I fit. And at one point, I even tried as a journalist, and then I even was a minister for a time, thinking, well, maybe I can help people. But here we are, 30 years into this, going from job to state, and never finding a niche. And I was at 53 years old, and we were facing homelessness again. And my wife and I said, with our 2 kids in tow, maybe we should try to find people who are in our same boat. Maybe we can help people who are asking the same questions. Where's the starting line? So we ended up using our home, the oldest home in town that we could afford. It needed a lot of work. And luckily, my background allowed me to do that work because we had no money. And we opened our home as a homeless shelter. And that opened a door that we never anticipated, because the Department of Correction asked us, could you take somebody coming from prison who's homeless? He's going to be released, but if he's homeless, he'll likely get into trouble. But if he has a place to live that's safe, then he will get a job and become a taxpayer instead of a tax burden. So we did that, and one house led to another house, and more beds, and now, 25 years later, we have a nonprofit called Good Samaritan Home. We have a staff of 10 people, and we have helped 2,500 men and women get back on their feet after prison. So and it's not in our house anymore, it's in 21 different houses in the Western Ohio region. I never envisioned that.
Geez, John, that was quite a powerful opening, and there's so much to unravel there. So I'm going to rewind just a little bit. So in childhood, you talk about the role models where you go and work in the mills and your days in the mills and then your night at the bar and then do this for 30 years. So in terms of like role models, but then you ended up doing something more entrepreneurial, like you bounced around a bunch before even starting your own nonprofit, which is very entrepreneurial. So tell me a little bit about the role models you had, either parents, friends, teachers, friends, parents that you had growing up that really helped form you or influenced you for better or for worse.
This is where it gets abstract. I was growing up and going to college during the 60s. And if you think of Forrest Gump, Forrest went through all these events in history that changed his life and he was part of for a myriad of reasons. Well, so was I. I wasn't active in politics, but everything about that era is political, and it was very, very violent. We like to think that there are issues right now in America, but they're really nothing compared to the 60s. We had literally thousands of bombings, mostly on college campuses. We had the Students for Democratic Society. We had the Weather Underground. We had Kent State. And the truth is that I was there on the morning of Kent State looking for a girl, and she wasn't there, so I moved on down the highway, and I was in the middle of Ohio State protests on the afternoon of the Kent State shootings, and the guards surrounded us. They had their guns drawn. We knew students had been killed that day, and it was by far the scariest situation I've ever been in because the country was coming apart. Now, obviously, nothing happened. I survived that day, but what it did was it left a scar that I couldn't go into the voting booth for the next 35 years because this feeling of growing up alone in a family of what I call a family of strangers. So I grew up alone, and the politics of that day just reinforced that. So that's why I don't think I went into an entrepreneurial job, because I just didn't fit in. And there are people like me who just don't feel comfortable working in the structured environment. The price you pay for that is there's a lot of mistakes that you make. When I was a building contractor, granted, I could make a lot of money on a project, but between projects, you make no money. And so the guy who goes to work in the mill every day and has the same job every day, at the end of his life, probably has more stable and secure outcome and income than an entrepreneur has. The difference is, I think entrepreneurs are hardwired for that.
So did you know any of these hardwired entrepreneurs growing up that you looked up to, or was it out of like what you had alluded to a little bit earlier, John, out of necessity that you had to become an entrepreneur?
I wish I had connections, because I grew up just trial and error. You try something, you make a mistake. You try something else, you make a mistake. And that's why so many careers. But I would say it's if you throw enough against the wall, eventually something sticks. And that's why, I don't feel embarrassed for all the things that I didn't do well. They were all part of the training. For example, as a journalist, I learned how to write so that the community can understand. That's helped me with the Good Samaritan Home. And I learned how to remodel the houses because of my construction background. And then my years as a minister taught me how to work with people who are in a hurting situation. So they weren't failures, but they were detours, I call them.
And what do you think gives you so much of a glass half full mentality, right? In terms of like never giving up and calling it a detour versus a failure? Because at the end of the day, it's the same thing happened, right? The event is the same. It's how you interpret, process, and think about the event that can be different, because a detour is like, oh, I learned from that, versus a failure could be like, you could get crushed and a lot of negative things could spiral out of that. So what has given you the ability to think about it in a more positive way?
There's a story about two twins that were diametrically the opposite. One was extremely negative and the other was extremely positive. And a psychologist put them both in a room, separate rooms, and the pessimist boy was put in a room full of toys. And he came back an hour later to see the pessimist boy looking at all the toys and complaining, they're probably not what I like. They'll probably break. They probably need batteries. I don't think I'll like them. The pessimist was still a pessimist. But he went into the other boy's room who had nothing but manure. And he found that boy throwing manure left and right, digging through it, covered in manure. And he heard him say, with all this manure, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. That's an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur says, if I just try one more way, one more road, one more thing, maybe I'll find what I'm looking for. I think what we hate, I think we're hardwired to always look for options, never quit trying. And that's why I call life a marathon. As long as you're running, no matter how slow you are, no matter how many times you fall down, if you get up and just keep moving. And I think that's probably the key element. And you can't teach it. It's like hunger. People have to be hungry to make their goal. And you can't teach hunger.
So, John, what did you end up studying in college, and what was the first type of job or role or major chapter after college?
I studied psychology because I thought it'd be interesting, mostly because I was trying to find out what was wrong with me. So, yeah, I think we had a saying, all the crazy people are in psychology because they need it the most. Now, keep in mind, this was 1970 when I graduated, and we still had the draft for Vietnam. So I applied for what they call a conscientious objector's deferment. And I was granted that, so I ended up working in an orphanage in Detroit in lieu of my Army commitment. So 2 years alternative service, they call it. So that's where I worked in the orphanage. And then from there, I went on to all these other careers, mostly just trying to put food on the table. But I think it's the idea of going to a new town. It was not uncommon to hitchhike across the country just to say you did it. I went back and forth to San Francisco several times with just $10 in my thumb. And that was common in that period.
And John, working at the orphanage and, the Good Samaritan Home, which we'll obviously talk about in a lot of detail, is about caring after other people. Did you have siblings? Were you the older sibling and you already benefited from this or were habituated to this behavior of taking care of other younger folks or people in need?
I think, no, actually, I felt like the term I use is we lived alone together. We had my parents, and they lived their separate lives. We had my two brothers and we lived our separate lives. And I would say we all wanted to just move on. We wanted to get away because home was just a place where we slept. It was not abusive. It was just that we were strangers. And I think that's probably more common with a lot of people.
So then after the orphanage, what was the next major chapter because you fulfilled your commitment there that turned up in your life?
Well, I was a truck driver for a time. And, actually, I enjoyed that. But driving a truck through Detroit is an experience in itself, to say the least. Particularly, this was only a few years after the race riots in Detroit. So it was an intense city. And that's what led to becoming a fireman, because I had seen something on television I thought would be wonderful to be a fireman. And the trouble with being a fireman is that it's a semi-military environment, and you have to be part of the group. I didn't fit too well, I guess you could say. And the fireman life is like being in the Army. It's 99% of your work is preparation, but only 1% of it is actual where you have to put your life on the line. So I call it's 99% preparation and 1% sheer terror. And if you can survive the 99%, then you can thrive on that. But again, if we're always looking for something, and this is probably the flaw part of an entrepreneur, instead of being content with something, you're always trying to get to the next step. You go to the next new thing. And it doesn't make for a stable life. Let's put it that way.
So then you're in your 20s and you've already been working at an orphanage. You've been truck driving in Detroit. Then you became a fireman. And then you shared with me that you encountered homelessness. Was that after being in the fireman, or when did that get laced in?
Actually, it was right after that. I bought a truck. I renovated it as a camper. And I was going to live in the truck, travel to California, and write a novel. And I even had a little Royal typewriter in the back, and I was going to type it out So I sat down in my camper, started to write, and I got the title, and it was blank. I had nothing to say. So, and then they repossessed my truck. So it cut my writing career much shorter than I anticipated. But there's a but there. I met my wife, and my wife and I started dating, and for some reason she saw something in me that nobody saw. And because of her, I got a job, this time as another truck driving job, and I stayed with it because of her and our new family. And everything was, I would say, more stable after that, if you can call moving from state to state stable. But at least I had a family that I never had before. And that to me is a big, big factor.
And then when you're having this family and you're talking about how your family was, it was just a home where people slept and couldn't wait to get away. Were you very intentional in being aware of that past cycle and you tried to create a home environment that was different? Or did you have to fall into that trap to then break out of it and say, no, actually, I want to have a different household environment than the one that you were familiar with growing up?
There are two ways I think you can learn. One is from the positive. You see something good and you follow it, you emulate it. And the other is from the negative. You see mistakes. That's why the second child often learns from the mistakes of the older brother or sister. They say, I know that doesn't work. I'm not going to do that. So I learned from my parents' mistakes. And when I married somebody, and my wife and I, we have a relationship where we're communicating. So my wife is my best friend. And we've been together 48 years since that time. And we've been together through some very hard times, some ups and downs, and there's been nobody in my corner as much as her. She's probably not just my best friend, probably my only friend that I'm truly comfortable with. So, and we've created, I think, a family that neither of us had.
Now that you've got the kids and the family, so how did that change you? Because it was so different than, your childhood, and you even alluded to it, like you're a truck driver and you're driving with the tenure was much longer and you were more focused on it because of the family. So how did you start evolving?
I remember I was in a motel in Texas. I had left my family in Kentucky where we had been living, and because the work was not there, and I went alone to follow the work. And I was in a motel, and I saw the lizards crawling up the wall of this flea bag motel, and I thought, what am I doing here? I'm 35 years old. I've got a family I had left behind, and I'm starting over again. But I stayed, and I kept working until I had saved enough money to bring my family with me. And that was the beginning of the upswing, because what I learned was it's sometimes you have to work through the hard times. You can't just leave and say, I'm done, I'm going for the next rainbow. This is where the perspiration comes in. The inspiration is only part of it. Most of it is, 80% of it is working through your inspiration with just plain sweat. And that's what we did in Texas. We created a degree of stability. And that was probably like I say of my friends I met there, that they taught me things about civilization, about being civilized that I just didn't know. So in fact, I think at one point I showed up in church with a suit on, and I'd never worn one. So they didn't recognize me.
Who's this guy?
Yeah.
So you're 35 and you're in this flea bag motel and something clicked and you saved up enough money to bring your family down. So did you change occupations yet again after that to bring more stability?
The downside to construction is you're only as good as your last job. And you either have to go big or you don't. Particularly as you go older, you can't do the work like you used to. So that's when I decided to go to graduate school. And that meant moving my family north. And that's another career change at 40. But we were at that point, because of the influence of these men we met in Texas in this church environment we were moving in, I thought that maybe I could become a minister too and use what I've been through to help other people. So the downside is that when you come out of construction, if something doesn't fit, you get a bigger hammer. That's how you make a nail fit, make a board fit. But in the church, if you're trying to be a minister and you try to take a hammer to people to get them to fit in, usually doesn't bode well. So let's just say that I wasn't very good at the politics of being in the church.
So basically, you go from truck driving to construction and then grad school up north in your 40s. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then
that's not the end of it. That's not the end of it.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm going. So then you become a
Yeah.
minister, and that didn't pan out for you because of the politics. So then, what is the next reinvention of John?
As I mentioned, I always wanted to write. So I had been doing a column for the local newspaper, and they were looking for a reporter. So I got the job, and I started my career as a journalist and spent the next, I think it was 10 or 12 years as a journalist. And actually, that was a very good education because I learned to appreciate how government works. And remember, we're coming out of the 60s. We're coming out of all the protests, the anti-government philosophy. But I found that most people in city and county government are just hardworking people trying to make sure that the water flows to your house and the street lights go on at night. And that's why in this current political environment where everybody's so critical of the bureaucrats, I have a great deal of sympathy for those people who go to work every day in government and just do their job. And I learned that as a journalist. I wasn't Woodward and Bernstein. I was just some local schmuck just trying to report on the city council meeting. But it taught me that it's okay to be civilized. It's okay to be normal. And that actually, it was a struggle to be normal, but I tried.
So more or less in your 40s, you're doing journalism and a local reporter. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then when you were 52 is when you started the Good Samaritan House or Home.
What happened was I told my wife and I were growing very disenchanted with what we were doing because, again, I had gone back. I even tried to go back into the church because I guess you're always looking for something better. So I was working as a journalist and as a part-time minister, and both of those eventually, I guess you could say they didn't pan out well. And we were without a job and almost without a place to live. That's when we decided that looking at, just listening to when you read back the litany of all the things I've done poorly, it kind of reminds me, this is why we ended up in Good Samaritan Home, because I think of all these things that I've done, what I call detours, that actually have been very difficult for me and my family. So that's when we decided that let's see if we can help somebody else. And by starting Good Samaritan Home, I was surprised that all of those things that I called detours actually aided me so that I could help somebody else. So now when somebody says, I don't know how to apply for a job or I don't know what to do, I don't dismiss that as being lazy. I tell them I understand, because some people we come across simply don't know because they've never been taught how to even apply for a job. The rest of us may take that for granted, but what I tell people is what you do is in the morning you get up and make your bed. If you make your bed, that's the first step to getting a job because you've done something right in the morning. And then when you go for a job and apply, and if they reject you, at night when you come home, at least your bed is made. And so that's an old Army philosophy, that you can go through the mud all day long at boot camp, but if you come home to a bed that's made and it's tucked and it's tight and it's clean, you know you did something right that day. And it's worked. It's worked with the people we deal with.
And John, when you decided to start the Good Samaritan Home, was it like idea and ensuing action like very close together, or did you have an inkling or a spark of inspiration maybe years prior that then was relit much more brightly when you were 52?
Well, I had people come to my door, would ask for a handout or ask for food, ask for help with a motel. And I knew that if you simply give somebody a fish, you're not really helping them. But if you teach them how to fish, then you may have provided them a way out of their homelessness. So I tried to deal with that on a very small level. And one thing led to another where a chaplain in the local prison asked me if I wanted to go and be part of a study that they were doing to find out how to better help people come in to the community from prison. So I worked as a volunteer, and that led to my connections with the inmates coming out of prison. So it was a series of minor steps, but it was always inclined towards how can I help somebody else who's been through the same struggles as me? In effect, what I found was the church in the street is actually very effective, more so than a church in the building.
And why is that the case?
Well, because we like to think of faith as doctrines. And Good Samaritan Home is a faith-based organization, meaning that our faith motivates us to help somebody who is suffering. There's a verse that says, how can you say you love God whom you have not seen if you don't love your neighbor who you do see? And that applies to the people on the street corner. If you go to church on Sunday and say you love God and ignore that person who's suffering out on the street, then your faith is shallow. So what we decided to do was, let's live our faith in the street. And that's what Good Samaritan does. It actually lives it by saying, are you hungry? How can I help you?
Wonderful. And then, John, you said it was a series of small events that led you to start Good Samaritan Home. And when these things started building upon each other, what were the types and how many conversations did you have with your family, in particular your wife, about this endeavor you're thinking about doing?
I give my wife the credit for that, because how many women do you know that would allow their home to bring in strangers off the street? So she had the same commitment I did, because we both believed that it's not what you say you believe, but it's what you do you believe. So this house we were living in had to be remodeled, and we did that with our own sweat equity. And over 14 years, we remodeled and remodeled and remodeled. And that's how we were able to actually get a house across the street and then another house, because we were able to grow as the need grew. So my volunteer work led to being asked to take somebody who could be assigned to us from prison to our shelter. And the state would then pay us a per diem. And that's where the serious blowback started at that point.
Can you share, like, when you say the serious, so what were the light blowbacks and what were the serious blowbacks that you just mentioned?
Well, the light blowback is when you take somebody, you have somebody coming from prison and they're coming into your neighborhood, into your home. And most people have these instinctive reactions when they think ex-offender, and particularly when you bring in racial issues. And on the news, if you watch the news, you'll see that every time they show somebody being arrested, majority of times they'll show this inner city and they'll show black people. But statistically, most people in prison are white. But we live in a white community, and so their racial fears were playing into it. So the first man who came to live with us was a black man. And there was people would come and not just talk to us, they would have passed petitions to try to stop what we were doing. They would call the city council. There were ordinances, the city council meeting, ordinances passed. And some of those meetings were extremely contentious because they thought we were running a halfway house in the community. And we weren't. We were simply offering temporary shelter in our home. And some of those meetings became extremely contentious. And there were threats. And at one point, I even had the police protect me at the meetings because it was so intense. And it took 3 years of legal wrangling to overcome those issues. But I will say this, David, that it wasn't the legal issues that won the day. It was how we lived in our neighborhood. We kept the cleanest house, we kept the quietest house, and in winter, we would clean everybody's sidewalk because we felt that a neighbor's sidewalk, if we clean that for them, that will say volumes about us, more so than any words we say. And now those same people who used to wave at us with one finger, if you know what I mean, now use all their fingers.
Yeah.
So it took a long time, but we won people over by simply being a good neighbor.
That's wonderful. And then, John, when you and your wife were talking, and it sounds like you have family, like, did you think about the types of crimes that they were released for that you would actually take into your own home, or were you open up to any, or did you do any screening on that front?
Our kids were grown, so nobody was coming into a home with our unprotected children. But when we started working with the Department of Correction, we worked with the parole officer. So they would screen somebody as being either low or moderate risk, somebody who simply needed housing. If we had any issues, we could simply call the parole officer and they would work with us. But the truth is that most people I've found, when they get out of prison, imagine what it's like. You've been locked up, say 5 years, 20 years, or 30 years. And what you did was so long ago. And by now you're 40 years old or 50 years old, and you're getting out of prison. You have no family. And they tell you, here's your bus pass. You're going to Dayton, Ohio. Stay out of trouble. And you don't know what to do. So most people, when they get to our house, are so glad to have a roof, to be off the street, that rarely do we have any issues. And if we do have issues, we simply call the PO and they address it. So that's why our success rate is so high.
It's incredibly inspiring. So, John, can you share maybe one or two examples of someone that you've taken into your house and then potentially follow through and share what they're doing to really bring the Good Samaritan Home to life?
I can give you two examples. One was Jimmy. He was schizophrenic, so he was in and out of the hospitals and in and out of jail because of his illness. And he had an offense from years ago, but once you get an offense, you're labeled, and that stays with you, particularly if you have mental illness. And the VA hospital called us because he was a veteran. And they said, can you take Jimmy in to your house? And we agreed to, as long as they guaranteed they would give him his psych meds. So he's stable. And Jimmy came to us when he was 67, and he was living on the street in the winter, and he almost died. And of course, his health was terrible at the time. But Jimmy stayed with us a week, 2 weeks, a month, a year. He stayed with us 14 years. And by the time he reached 81 years old, he said, this is the only home I ever had. And he died with us in peace. And I felt like that is exactly, sometimes giving a place to die safely, a clean bed, a roof over your head, is the only security that Jimmy knew. The other example is actually totally different. Walter was 16 years old when he got in trouble in Cincinnati, and he had a gun, and he tried to steal a car, and they charged him, picked him up and charged him, and they gave him 9-year sentence. And he was 16 years old. And here's this young, scared kid going to prison. And so when he came to us, when 9 years later, he had nowhere to go because he had no family in Ohio. And he was a black man coming into a white community. And the difference was, he said he put all those racial issues that he grew up with, he put them aside, and he learned in prison how to get along with white people. And so when he came to us, he was extremely teachable. And we were able to connect him to an employer who gave him a job. He stayed at that job until, I think it was 2 years ago, he finally found another job, and he's making twice the money. He's married, he has a son, and he's been involved with us. He even lives a block away from us now. And I just happened to talk to him on Saturday, and he's probably one of the best parts of our neighborhood, because he's a living example of what happens when you do it right, step by step by step. I felt good talking to him.
And then when you talk about doing it right, step by step, John, like Good Samaritan Home started with one step, one home. How many are there nowadays?
21. We have a staff of 10 people.
And then how are these 21 homes affiliated with the Good Samaritan Home? Does the organization own them all, or are they just people who all wanted to do something like you all did and you share best practices about how to operate it?
That has been done in some occasions, but we feel that to keep a safe house, you have to have control. You have to have structure and discipline, which is the missing element with most people in prison. So we're required to check these houses every day. They're called independent housing, meaning that they're not a lockdown. Somebody is not required to be there. They are only there because they're homeless, and they choose to be there because they don't want to live on the street. So what we do is we say, here are rules, here are the guidelines, and here's what we require of you. But there's no charge. And so our staff will come in 3 times a day just to touch base. We call it mentoring. And so we're not parole officers, we're not prison guards, we're not psychologists. We are simply mentors. And we try to say, how can I help you? And that seems to be the most effective. That's why some of our best staff are females, because the missing element in many of these lives is a mother figure. They call my wife the grandmother because she many of them have very positive memories of their grandmother. And I've never seen anybody who can get people to volunteer like she does.
Yeah. And John, are these mixed gender homes, or are they like gender specific, like men on these homes, women in these homes, or is there a distinction?
We have one house for women. because what we found was you like to think that having a house for women there'd be a great need for that. But the truth is, statewide, what the Department of Correction has told us, and we found, there's not a great demand for female housing. Most women tend to find somebody, family, friends, a boyfriend, and there aren't the same numbers in prison with women. So we have one house for women, and right now we only have one woman there. So over the years, we might have 2 or 3, but the numbers are clearly with men.
And then given, now looking back, it's extremely successful and you've touched, hundreds and hundreds of lives, which is so admirable. But was there a moment within all the neighborhood issues, the death threats, the police armed escort, that you felt like this is just too overwhelming and I might want to throw in the towel and just transition to the next thing in life?
That's interesting you should say that, because I was talking to my wife about that. And sometimes when you're under the greatest stress, when the threat is the most intense, it seems like the adrenaline kicks in and you're extremely focused. And it's actually easier because, like Dr. King said, if a man doesn't have something worth dying for, he's not fit to live. And once you've committed to a cause and you're willing to pay the price, whatever that may be, for what you believe in, it's actually quite easy after that. And I remember one meeting, it was extremely intense. We thought we wouldn't get out the door. The room was packed out into the hall and down the steps. And there's just a calmness that comes over you, because once you know that you're in the right and you're not responding in the same tone. Dr. King would call it soul force. You don't give hate back to hate. You give love back to hate. And that's not some hug-a-thug type of thing. That's simply saying, I'm letting go of my right to be right, and I'm just going to allow what happens, and I'm not going to compromise it. In effect, I've been thinking a lot about that lately with the current politics, how so many people have flip-flopped on their beliefs and done things and said things that a year ago they wouldn't have said or done because of political pressure. And I think that's where politics can be at its weakest, when it becomes transactional and when it becomes just simply a deal, when it should be a moral cause. And so I look back at that time when it was really intense, and I feel like if I'm ever in a situation like that again, I feel comfortable that I'll do the right thing because I did the right thing then. And I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying I've been under fire and I know I'll do it again.
It feels like for the Unlost Cause audience, we talk about people who are brave enough to live without regrets and turn a lost cause into unlost cause. But for you, we have to use plurals, like you've taken lost causes and made them unlost causes. And the other one is writing a book, right? And this happened to be in your 60s, but you talked about maybe doing that earlier in life, and then, journalism getting you ready for it. So can you share, and then you had the typewriter in the back of the car. So, but that took a hiatus and then you came back to it. So can you share with the audience what sparked this re-energized spirit to get to write a novel in your 60s?
I remember I was at the city council meeting, and very intense, and I was trying to persuade people as to the merits of reentry support. And I had data, reams of data. I was present the statistics, and nobody listened. I remember there were learned people, there were attorneys who were opposed to it, and they said, I just don't care. I don't want those people. And they were giving an emotional reaction. So I thought, how do I get people to see these men and women we deal with? They're sons and daughters, their grandchildren, who more than likely have gotten involved in drugs or in alcohol and have, because of their addictions, have gone places and done things that they wouldn't normally do. They deserve a second chance. How do I get people to see that? And what came to mind was the movie Titanic. Movie Titanic actually is a wonderful documentary about lifeboat safety. If you look at that and you say, remember, always have enough lifeboats and make sure your staff knows how to use them. And that movie would never have gone anywhere as a documentary. So we brought in Jack and Rose and made it into a love story. And today we're still talking about it. So what I said was, nobody cares about reentry rehabilitation. Nobody cares about coming out of prison. How can I make it real? So I came up with a fiction story about Daniel Robinson, who grew up in the mill slums of Pittsburgh and who wandered the country in the 60s. Sound familiar?
Vaguely, vaguely.
It's not a biography. That's a beautiful thing about fiction. You can go anywhere you want with it. But it's a Forrest Gump type of story about a boy who struggles to find a family, and this story became intensely emotional as I wrote it. And all those things that I had gone through, I put into the story about this fictional character. It took me 10 years to write it. Now, here's the thing. I don't come from a literary background. I had to teach myself how to write emotionally because my training as a journalist and my academic training taught me to put the facts down, but nobody reads facts. So I had an editor teach me how to do emotional writing. And when we finally finished this story, we knew it was good, but we sent it out to the agents thinking now the New York Times is going to say we're the best book they've seen in years. And all I heard back was the sound of silence. Because I had no connections, I had no credentials, I had nobody speaking for me, and there are hundreds and thousands of books printed every year that die in silence, and mine was dying. It was rejected by 200 agents and publishers over the next 3 years. And I sat on this book and I said, I know it's good, and it's not a book about nothing. It's not an entertainment book. It's an emotional book that people will enjoy if we can just get them to read it. So I ended up connecting with an outcast publisher called Don Quixote Press, who only carries people like me. And they promoted it. And in the past year and a half, we have sold 17,000 books, which doesn't sound like a lot compared to John Grisham, but the average book, across the board, sells less than 250 copies in a lifetime. So this book has been extremely successful. But what has really impressed me, David, is not the sales, and it's not the awards either. What has impressed me has been the readers writing back. And they said, I cried when I read this story. I lived that story. This story gave me hope that there's another chance for me. And reader after reader said the same thing. And that, to me, is exactly what I wanted. So I haven't made any money to speak of, but I've gotten very, very rich on knowing that these people have learned from Daniel's story, from my story.
Wow. I think about how this has all unfolded about your own life story and, facts versus, stories like, Jack and Rose on the Titanic versus like how many people on the lifeboat. It all seemed to like come together in this story, this book, this novel that you wrote, Running as Fast as I Can, and then the emotional riches that you've been able to get out of it. It just feels like it's come full circle. And as I think about that, I can't help but ask, what is next? Is there like a movie script you're working on, or a different what is next? I mean, it's so unbelievable to think about another lost cause becoming an unlost cause.
My ego sometimes runs ahead of reality. I tend to write ego checks that my body can't cash. But I thought this would actually make a very good movie. The trouble is that the movie would change it into a whole different story. So what I did was I started doing these podcasts because I started off talking about the book, and then it was talking about Good Samaritan Home. And then we spent a lot of time talking about the issues in both of them: homelessness, drug addiction, family abuse, sexual abuse, forgiveness. That was my goal, to get people talking about these issues. And I think that the political climate right now is so angry that people are hungry for some news of second chances. Because when we have our leaders saying things that we don't allow our children to say, to talk in ways that we don't in polite society talk about one another, and we think, what has happened to us? We didn't even do this in 68. So, and I think people are they know what they're going is not the right direction, but they don't know how to turn around. And I'm hoping that my book and these podcasts and the book that second book I'm writing now called Requiem, I'm hoping that will offer a voice of hope in a time when I think it's extremely important.
And going back, before you found Don Quixote Press, you said that you were rejected 200 times, right? And so you were obviously counting because you probably had a spreadsheet or something you sent out to this person, said no, sent out to this person, said no. I mean, those are maybe the first few are like big body blows, and the next ones are probably like, you're still getting minor body blows, but how did you keep your spirits high versus like, you were just saying your mind writes ego checks that maybe your body can't cash. Did you ever think like, maybe I think this is good, but reality it isn't good and I need to rethink this?
Interesting you should say that, because I was just thinking the very same thing. Because I would get so many rejections that whenever it came in the mail, I told my wife without opening it, it's another rejection. And because maybe I'm not a good writer, maybe I didn't do a good job, maybe what they are looking for, I don't know how to do or can't do or won't do. But the frustration was I would read some of the books that were popular and say, I don't get it. I don't like it. It doesn't read well. I think my story's better than theirs. Why isn't it selling? And I guess the answer was there is no answer. You just have to keep trying. And now, when I started sending out the book for a contest, a literary contest, and I started getting awards back, winner, finalist, runner-up, the number is now up to 30, I think it's 38 awards that have come in the past 18 months. Now, when I submit to a contest, I think the exact opposite of what I thought before. I think I'm going to get an award. I think I'm going to get a positive review. I think like a winner. And my thinking has been rehabilitated because I thought I was a rejected writer. I thought I was a poor writer. Now I realize that I wasn't a poor writer. I was just marketing to the wrong audience.
And so with this shift in mindset, and I think mindset is incredibly important. And, at my past company, I used to tell people every day when you walk through that door, well, before it was remote work, you have a choice. You can be happy, you could be upset, or you could be neutral. But the kicker is it's a free choice, right? You get to decide what you want to be. And you just said at the beginning, when you got the letters in the mail, you're like, oh, here's another rejection. And now when you get it, you're like, I just won another award, right? So there's this big mindset shift. For this upcoming book, Requiem, are you carrying that positive mindset shift forward with that book?
I had such a steep learning curve when I first wrote Running that the book I wrote in the first draft was totally different from the final draft. And what I'm hoping to do is I take excerpts from that original book and I say, I want to be sure to write it like this. I want to carry that over. So my confidence level going into it and my ability to know how to write that emotional scene is at a whole different level now. So I feel much more confident that it won't take 10 years. I hope to have it done in 2 years. I've also realized that I'm not 25 anymore, and 10 years is a much longer time at my age. So I better write it in 2.
In terms of like when you think about all these accomplishments that you've been able to check off and off the checklist, John, are you proud of yourself?
Well, that's a tough question. On one level, I see how far we've come. And yes, I'm very pleased that we have 10 people and a $2 million budget for Good Samaritan Home, and that we've helped 2,500 people. And many of them have never gone back to prison. I'm very pleased with that because these were people that no one would touch. And I'm proud of the fact that I set out to write a book and I did it. And if nobody bought it, at least I did it. And maybe that's the lesson. It's not for the praise. It's not for the awards or the money. Sometimes it's just doing it. And like Rocky said in the movie, I just want to be standing at the end of the fight. And that's what I would say. I'm very pleased with that. But I don't want to just stop because, to be quite candid, nothing scares me more than doing nothing. So after a year's hiatus, I sat down to start writing Requiem. And that was scary because it's like starting a new ball game after you've been off on a break. You wonder, can I still hit the ball? Have I lost my swing? But I'm 3 chapters into it, and I think we're okay.
That's great. And for all the lives you've touched and the listeners on this Unlost Cause show, what would be some of the key takeaways you hope that, your life story has done for them? Like, is it overcoming adversity, glass half full? Like, what are the main principles that you want other people to take away from, this amazing journey you've been on?
I think it's pretty simple. That you look at Facebook and you see all the reels on Facebook and you see all these hard bodies, I call them, young people, fit, thin, muscular. They have all the beautiful people surrounding them. They have all the accoutrements of wealth. And you look at your life and you say, that's not me. And I would say that's fiction. Reality is you. So you keep running because life is not a Facebook post. Life is you getting up and going to work every day providing for your family every day, helping your neighbor every day. And at the end of your life, they will know that you made a difference in someone's life. So it's not about money and it's not about fame. It's about doing the best with what you've been given. And some of us haven't been given much, but we've created something more out of it. We've helped somebody else.
And then, John, if you were on your deathbed and you did not take a chance to start, Good Samaritan Home and write your novel and pursue it to get it published, how do you think you'd feel?
I wish I had is probably the saddest phrase you can ever say in life. And I think most people are collared with that. They're afraid to fail. They just don't know what to do, so they don't do anything. And so I would say when I wrote the book, I just wanted to know that I tried. I did my best. I didn't want to say, I'm going to write a book. I have to say, I would rather say I wrote a poor book than no book at all. So I would say to just try, just do whatever step you can, because the alternative to do nothing is probably the worst sentence you can put on somebody. I wish I had.
And then, since we're in this together as part of the Unlost Cause community, what ask would you like to make of our community and listeners and watchers?
Well, it sounds like an advertisement, but I would encourage people to download a copy of my book because I think they'll find it encouraging. And if you're on Kindle Unlimited, it's free, but it's on Amazon. But I would encourage you to take that lesson and say, how can I help somebody else? Who around me needs my help more? What can I do today to make a difference? So I think George Bush Sr. once said that we need 1,000 points of light to get through the darkness. And he was talking about the Cold War era. And he wanted people like you and I to be one of those points. So that's what I would encourage people to do. It's not about being in Congress. It's not about being rich. It's not about being Bill Gates type of philosopher or philanthropist. It's about you doing something in your neighborhood when you see somebody who needs something and just help them. I saw somebody pay for a meal at McDonald's just out of the blue. They said, here, they paid for this guy, and the guy was a grouch. But when he got that free meal notice, his whole demeanor changed. And I thought, there's the lesson. I saw it right in front of me. A man went from being a grouch to being grateful. And I think there's a lesson in that.
Certainly. And then for the listeners, how can they support, follow, connect with you or your organization on social? Feel free to share all the social handles or email addresses or websites right here.
The easiest thing to do is just go to johndavidgraham.com. And that's my website, and you can link to other sites on there, like where the book is found, or Good Samaritan Home. It'll link there. It'll also link to my Substack columns where we talk at length about some of these issues. So, and I would be, there's a contact link too. So if someone has questions, we're not looking for donations, but I encourage people to at least read the book and find out about second chances. And maybe reading that will impact them as much as writing it did me.
That's wonderful. John, you didn't find your stride in your 20s or maybe even in your 40s, but you never stopped running. And at 53, you built a nonprofit that's changed thousands of lives. And now at 75, you published a novel that's inspires thousands more. And it's so awesome to hear people writing you with very poignant shares. And your story reminds us that purpose with time, it ripens with it. And if you found value in today's episode, please like, comment, or share with someone who might be running their own race. And remember, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, David.
Before you go, if you're inspired and want to be a part of something bigger, subscribe, like, and share to help more people reclaim their dreams and live true to themselves. Also, let me know if you or someone you know would be an inspiring guest on this show. Together, let's spark courage to live without regrets. The Unlost Cause way, one story and one person at a time.